I was interested to see how much more growth there's been when you use fertilizer versus no fertilizer whatsoever. Morning gardeners, we are here in the garden today. We're in the wild garden to be exact, and we've got to feed our plants. I came out here and looked around, and the wild garden needs a little bit of food, but it needs a little bit of water too, so we're gonna kill two birds with one stone, and we're gonna do it at the same time. To show you what I mean, like if we come out here and look at these rutabagas here, you see these leaves? They are just a little bit soft, so it's a good indication to me that they in fact do need some water. And because we're using an injector to feed them, then it's going to do both at the same time, which works out really good for us. We'll say this, when it goes to feeding your plants, especially in spring, like for us, we're racing against the clock always. So we want to feed our plants in order to get them to push more growth and to get to that portion of their life where they start producing the edible food. So that's why we're going to push the fertilizer to them. And we gave them some granular fertilizer yesterday, but that'll take some time to break down. We've also given them a pre-planting fertilizer, so that's already starting to work, and it's apparent just by how big things have gotten as fast as they have. Not to mention the weather is like absolutely perfect right now. But I've been using this injector here, using this contraption. Yeah, it is a little freaky looking, but trust me, it works good and it's not as confusing as it looks. And I've been putting fish fertilizer in it as well. And so because fish fertilizer isn't that strong, you can actually feed with this every week. All right, so I'm out here by the unsexy side of the garden where basically everything happens, and that is at the water faucet. So I'm going to show you how I use this fertilizer injector, because when I first saw it, it was really confusing. It seemed overly complicated, but once I changed my watering technique, it made sense for me to use it. And specifically, I got it for corn this year, but we're going to go ahead and use it for this too, because it just works out so good. And I've got it set up so it's a lot easier to use, because I actually have to use two different faucets for each section of my garden. So I need to move it from place to place. And you're not supposed to leave it hooked up all the time, so there is that issue. But I'll show you how I've made that easier myself, and I'll show you how I use it. Timer, and I've got these quick disconnects hooked up here. So it's really easy. You just pull it up, and then I've got them hooked up on this as well. So this is the main part, and I've got it hooked up so I can't mess it up, because you know, I will mess it up. Doing it one-handed is a little bit harder. And so just like that, we are completely ready to go. And then we go on down here. So we've got these little, this is the water in and the fertilizer out tube. So we turn off both of them just for right now. And then what I'll do is I'm going to open this and put the fertilizer in. And so the trick with this is to, when you put the fertilizer in, you actually want it filled up most of the way with water. So that's going to make it a little bit easier. So I still have it filled up from last time, so we're going to pour a little bit out. Not a whole lot. And then we're going to take our fish fertilizer, give it a shake. And then all I do is I just put a pretty decent glug in. Maybe a little bit more. And so it's filled up most of the way. I think at this point it's filled up to right here. So let me make sure I don't spill this stuff all over me. So this is going to be what filters it, and this is going to be, I'm sorry, yeah, this is what sprays the water in to stir it. And this is what filters it out, so you don't get any chunks in there, because you know, fish fertilizer can be kind of chunky, and that's why you really want to make sure that you shake it first. And then we just want to make sure that we get our O-ring in. We start it. Then on top of this particular model, there is actually a setting for slow, like level 1, 2, and 3 slow, and then fast. And I actually find that it works better for me to put this on fast, because then in the amount of time I can get the water to come through. So at this point, now that everything's set up, all I'm going to do is turn my timer on, And I found that about 72 minutes will get the majority of it in there. And so once it turns on, you're gonna wait for it to click. And then the waters are gonna start running. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn this on, and you're gonna let it start to fill up. And then once this starts to fill up, I give it just a couple seconds, and then I'm gonna turn this line on. And then you start to see the water flowing, and then you see it turn brown. And so it's injecting from here all the way into here. And then it's gonna come out my emitters. So it's pretty cool. This has been a really big game changer for me because it helps me save fertilizer, save money, and save time. It is a little bit of setup, but it works pretty good. So so far am really feeling it. I'm getting great results out of it. So I can't really complain too much. If you guys are feeding your plants with any kind of fertilizer, then definitely put in the comments below, because everybody's always looking for a different kind of fertilizer to use, and they're trying to figure out what works for them. So if there's something that's really been good to you, put it in the comments so other people will know as well what they can use. So I know what you must be thinking is, hey Ben, why is it saving fertilizer? I don't understand. Well, to be honest, I didn't understand either until I started using it. But if you think about it, if I was gonna use the same fertilizer and hand water with it, I would water the soil, the leaves, and everything. And yeah, it does foliar feed to an extent, but you really need to foliar feed in the morning because the plant's pores are more open in the morning, and so it's willing to accept it better. Not that it won't accept it, but it's better. But this way, if you think about it, and it's injecting in directly into our system, you're not getting that overspray, it's not evaporating, it's not sitting on the leaves, it's getting right to the plant, right where it needs it. And I mean, we can look at it right now and tell. If you look down here, you can see it's just gonna emit very slowly all the way through. And we're not gonna have any overspray or any waste or anything like that. So what this has done is it's allowed me to go ahead and fertilize more. So I'm fertilizing, like I said, each garden I'm doing about once a week, because the fish fertilizer does not stay around as long, so you can use it more often. It's diluting it for you. You don't have to do any of that stuff, and it's going straight to it. So all in all, it's a pretty good gig. Now, I mean, there could be a downfall. The definite downfall would be setting it up and getting used to it. That can be really hard to do. It's not hard to do, but it just takes a minute. But if you follow the steps that I showed you, then you should be good. Now you can inject this into a water hose too and just spray that way. You can do that as well. You can hook it up to a sprinkler, whatever you want. But I wanted something that would go directly to the plant roots and do its thing right in there. And this seems to be doing the trick thus far. So we're pretty happy with the results. I mean, you can see like the broccoli back here is much bigger than it is normally this time of year, given the time that it's been in the ground. Now, something that I will do with this is I will leave it hooked up overnight, because my timer is supposed to come on in the morning, and then it'll finish flushing that out and get all the fertilizer out. I think the fish fertilizer is a little bit thick for it, so it does have a hard time pushing it through, and then it doesn't empty out in the right amount of time. So it's kind of like giving it a double watering almost. But I'm okay with that, because a lot of these plants, because they are just real heavy, you know, feeders, and they require a lot of water because you're plumping up leaves constantly, I think it does make a difference, and it's okay to give them a little bit extra water. Now, when it comes to our tomatoes and stuff like that, where cracking is an issue, we're probably gonna switch from the fish fertilizer into something a little bit thinner. I have read that it's not recommended to use a fish fertilizer, but I mean, we're game. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're having good results with it, so we're just gonna keep going. In due time, we shall start to feel these leaves thicken back up and not just be so floppy. Now, sometimes this is a result from the warmth, but it's not really all that warm today. I mean, we are starting to get warmer, sunny days, but today is not that bad. But I mean, yeah, this one too is just feeling a little bit thin, so with this new in-ground watering system that we're using, we definitely we're trying to figure out the exact time frame in which to run it, like how many days in between. And right now we have it set for every 3 days, which it seems to be a little bit close, a little bit too long, but I feel like every 2 days would be too much. So, you know, hopefully we'll get a rain once a week and that'll kind of help add the moisture back into the ground. But you can see like our lettuce is starting to do really good. And I mean, I really say this is all because of our feeding. Now, we don't just use this injector. I want to be very clear about that. We put a pre-plant fertilizer down into the furrow. We put we side dress with the fertilizer as well. So we'll go along the rows and put more in, probably about roughly 2 to 3 weeks after planting. And then really once we see the plants start to get comfortable, we start injecting that fish fertilizer, and that seems to be working out pretty good. If we go to a different organic liquid fertilizer, then we'll have to play with how often we're pushing that through. But we can also kind of do a little bit of conjunction where we do the fish fertilizer 1 week and then we do another fertilizer another week, because we do plan to switch from exclusively using that fertilizer into the injector. Now, if you do a synthetic fertilizer, you can put that in as well. You'll see good results with that. So all of that stuff works, but watching the color of that hose really helps. And I figured out that if I left it connected for a day, like another watering session, then it does clear it all up, because that fish fertilizer, because there's fats and stuff in it from the fish, it does settle at the bottom. Even though the hose does spray it to kind of mix it up in there, it's still kind of settle. So we'll give it another push through, and then we'll switch it to our other one and do our garden over here, because we've seen that we do need some fertilizer over there. So we're just trying to constantly stay on top of that, especially for our onions, because we really need to push the growth as much as possible right now. For instance, in our potato bed here, we do not have anything popping up, so we're not actually feeding it with that yet. We actually did put some more granular fertilizer down, so when it does start to grow, it will start producing and start feeding. But as soon as they come up and they start to get a little bit situated, then we're going to do that as well. I mean, right now we're not even really watering this bed too much. I might water it the next time the timer comes on, but we'll have to see. But I mean, if you look at the growth over here, I mean, every time we use the fish fertilizer in here, we inject, we see growth almost immediately. It'll push up, it'll get greener, it'll stand up stronger, and it's made it so it's more resilient to the cold weather. I mean, this is a really trying time for your gardens. You know, you're going to get warm days and you're going to get cold days. And the stronger your plants are, the better they can hold up and withstand against those random cold nights we have. And that's why we push. Now, if I look into the future and I look at the forecast and I see that there's some really cold weather coming, then I will withhold feeding them so that I can get, you know, I don't want to push new growth when there's going to be a freeze. But we just had 2 freezes in a row, and we're not supposed to get any for the next 10 days. So that means I can probably get 2 feedings out of each bed, roughly 2 feedings, before we do it again. And I've been going through, I had a half bottle of that fish fertilizer. I think I've gone through a 1/4 bottle in a month of feeding. So if you think about it, and that's feeding every week, 2 times, well, 2 different garden beds. So that's 2 feedings a week, technically, if you're following what I'm saying. And we've only gone through a 1/4 of a bottle. That's not too bad. Now, if we got some kind of other stronger fertilizer that needed, you know, a couple weeks in between, then we could make that gallon stretch for most of the growing season, if not all of it. But because we can garden, I'm gonna call it 3.5 seasons out of the year, then it does make a difference. So we probably would need to crack open another bottle, but I'm totally comfortable just pushing the fish fertilizer in here. I want to try something different to see what the results are. I've been using fish fertilizer for a long time, so it's worked out really well. But in conjunction with all of the other methods that we use and the organic methods, you just have to understand, and I say this a lot, but I'm gonna keep saying it, that the organic granular fertilizers take time to break down and start to feed. So this is kind of filling in those gaps and feeding so we can push that growth faster and stronger. So hopefully we can meet our deadline, because our deadline here is when it gets too hot for these things to bolt. So we're really close to getting heads of broccoli. Some of the cabbage is getting close. The rutabagas are getting really close, so we really want to stay on top of it so we can push it hard. And the onions, you got to feed those a lot. We've got to keep feeding them all the way up until the time they start to bulb, and then we'll stop feeding them. But until then, it's feed, 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 feed. And the same with the potatoes. We want to get them up and running when they finally come out of the ground. So hopefully that'll be soon, but you never know. So here's the broccoli that I have in a pot, and you can see how tall it is. We'll just do this, and you see how it is. And then here's another broccoli. All these broccoli were planted at the same time. So you see how big they were. These guys have gotten no fertilizer at all. None of the fish fertilizer. I just did put some granular in. So it's starting to work, but it'll take some time. But if we come all the way over here, and I did this on purpose because I wanted to see what the difference would be. Here's the broccoli in this garden. And I mean, you can see the difference, hopefully. So it's like 3 times the size. So there's definitely a difference in how things are growing. Why didn't I put fertilizer in there? Well, yes, I wanted to test it, but also because I'm lazy and I just didn't want to put fertilizer in there. I wanted to see how it would do, but once I start feeding all of these bonsai trees back here, at the same time I feed them with fish fertilizer too, then I'll start feeding these as well. So it's I don't feed these yet because they're not actively really growing and it could hurt them, but that's totally different. So I'm like an opportunistic feeder in this section right here. So we're not gonna feed them yet. I was interested to see how much more growth there's been when you use fertilizer versus no fertilizer whatsoever.